Hi, podcast listeners. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. We have so many guests on this show making a difference in our lives, making a difference all around the world with the expertise that they bring. And yet so many of you are reaching out to me saying, you want more. It's not enough just what we're putting on these podcast episodes for you. And so I am here to extend a very warm welcome to you to our Difference Maker community, where you can join for as little as $5 a month to get all this extra content. Out the gate, you're going to get 30 plus minisodes of exclusive content not available for the regular podcast listeners, and an exclusive minisode every month. And you'll get exclusive voting power to help us pick podcast topics and more. And that's at our Changers tier. There's 3 different main tiers and then an extra larger tier. But whatever tier that you join at, you will be included in this extra content. And I know that many of you are wanting to go a little bit deeper. And so even though it gets a little wild in there sometimes because of how deep we go, I want you to join us there. This extra content is very special. It means a great deal to me to be a part of this community with you. And I would love to just exchange ideas or perspectives that you have around these different episodes. And that's the place where we do it. So please show up to our Difference Maker community. Give us $5 out of your pocket every month. And I think that you'll have a lot of fun in there because we do. And I would love for you to join us. So go to patreon.com/A World of Difference to join us there. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. I'm your hostess, Lori Adams Brown, and you're listening to episode 26. My guest on today's show is Nancy Ortberg. Nancy is the CEO of Transforming the Bay with Christ, which is a nonprofit here in the San Francisco Bay Area that brings together leaders from faith, business, and tech communities to reimagine and work together for what it would look like to make life better for every person in the Bay Area, physically, educationally, relationally, and spiritually. And Transforming the Bay with Christ is an outstanding nonprofit that she gets to lead with an outstanding team of people really who have a heart for coming together from many different types of churches and types of work to collaborate together in this effort. It's a beautiful organization that she gets to lead. She's got a long history of amazing things that she's done in her life. However, many of you may have originally known about Nancy when she spent 8 years at Willow Creek Community Church in Chicago as a teaching pastor. She also during that time led Network, which is a ministry that helps people identify their gifts and find a place in the church that they can use their gifts. Access was also a weekly gathering that she led for 18 to 20 something generation. And a lot of her leadership knowledge comes out of the time she spent there. But also she spent her early career as a nurse. And I find that women who are in the nursing profession also often find that to be an incredible leadership lab because of the predominance of women in that industry. She is a gifted communicator and speaker. She has also been a founding partner of Teamworks 2, which is a business and leadership consulting firm. She's worked with churches and businesses and schools and nonprofits to address issues around organizational effectiveness and teamwork. And I would just say she is spectacular when it comes to understanding teamwork, the dynamics of team. She really is the kind of leader that fosters collaboration and to be your true authentic self on your team. And so that's just the kind of leader she is. She's been a speaker around the world. Many of you have been to conferences either in person or online lately where she has spoken. She's also an author. She has written a couple books, Looking for God, An Unexpected Journey Through Tattoos, Tofu, and Pronouns, and also Unleashing the Power of Rubber Bands, Lessons in Nonlinear Leadership. I have gotten to know her. She's on the board of the church where I work, and she is just the kind of person that inspires you to be a better version of your own self, and just such an inspiration and just so kind and ready to lead in spontaneous ways at times, and just by the life that she lives. You may know her husband, who's also an author and a pastor, John Ortberg. She and her husband live here in the Bay Area and have 3 children. It is my utter delight to welcome to today's show Nancy Ortberg. Hi, Nancy. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Lori. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I'm super excited to hear from your wisdom, all your years of experience. And I know my podcast listeners all around the world, those that know who you are excited too. But for those who don't know who you are yet, I'd love for you just to tell us about yourself, maybe a little bit about your background and kind of currently what you're doing.
Sure. So I grew up in California, second generation LA girl, went to college and seminary down there, married John 38 years ago almost, and have 3 children. I've been a nurse as part of my past career, and then also a teaching pastor, a business consultant. And right now I'm working with an organization in the Bay Area that's trying to bring a collaborative, holistic gospel movement to the 11 counties and 256 cities in the Bay Area. It's called Transforming the Bay with Christ, affectionately nicknamed TBC.
Yes, and the work that you're doing there is incredible for those of us in the Bay Area. We're so grateful for your leadership there. I want to talk a little bit about the years you spent in ministry as a pastor and then as a Christian author, trainer, and speaker, all these different, jobs that you've had. You've been a nurse. And you also worked with Patrick Lencioni, I think, in some leadership for a while. So it's just a plethora. I mean, your resume is just very varied in that way. But I'd love to know, just for you personally, how has your faith impacted your work, both in the secular spaces and in the full-time ministry spaces in similar ways?
Yeah, and I don't really see a difference in those two. And I think, growing up and listening to great teachers talk about that there is no divide between the secular and the sacred has really made an impact. I think trying to figure out how you do your work, no matter what setting you're in partnership with God, and what is it that He wants from us. And I think a lot of times in our culture now, we talk about our passion and wanting to fulfill that. And that's not a bad thing, but it can also be very full of self. And so much of work is about adding goodness to the world. And so if I'm in a job, and I certainly have been many times where it wasn't at the center of what I'm passionate and even great about, I think the call still is to partner with God during the day in the way that I treat people, in the way that I do my work, in the way that I see it as really being the hands and feet of Jesus on my best days, Yes.
Well, I would say you've been a great example of that to me and many others who know you or read your books or just have listened to you speak. And I think one of the things that grieves me as a person who is in full-time ministry, but also sees it the way that you do in terms of the sacred and the secular not being as different as we often say. What grieves me often is how sometimes we elevate this full-time paid ministry status over, people who are doing incredible jobs as living out their callings as, scientists or civic leaders, teachers, nurses, even here in the Silicon Valley, software engineers that are helping us have Bible apps and things like that, living out their God-given gifts to make the world a better place. And so I'd love for you to give us your thoughts on where do you think we get this wrong in the church about that kind of thing?
Well, and what you just said describes such a continuum of different kinds of work. And even if they're not making a Bible app, even if they're just doing a regular app, Dallas Willard used to say that your work is your primary place of discipleship. It's really the primary place where you take what you know and you start living it out. And that's really when faith makes a difference. A lot of times people will say, when you know better, you do better. And I love what Andy Stanley says, it's not necessarily at all. And that a lot of people that are doing work in spiritual formation talk about practice is the new deep. And we'll talk about wanting to go deeper in our faith, but what we mostly mean is, can we read a book or be in a Bible study class where we're insulated from the pain of the world and just learn more? And I think work is such a great place to have to intersect with people, both at the level of getting great work done, but maybe also their personal lives, that they may bring something up. How do I show up to do really, really good work no matter what kind of work I'm doing, unless it's illegal or immoral,
Yeah.
and find God deeply in that, like a farmer would, like a Starbucks barista would, and that work is really the addition of good in the world, and all good comes from God.
Yeah, so beautifully said. You know, I'm raising kids, and my parents were in full-time ministry, and my husband and I have been as well. And there's a lot of pressure when you raise your kids that are second, even first generation in that regard, to, be in full-time ministry. And, a lot of people almost feel like it's bragging rights if you have 5 kids and they all end up in full-time paid ministry, right? But it's like, I look at each of my kids and they were born with such different bents, each individually. Like, how can you have 3 opposites? I don't know. And I even have twins and they're totally the opposite of each other. But they each have these gifts that I see in them that I've seen for a long time. And part of me, especially with one of mine, he's very gifted in a lot of like the STEM field. And there's just, so there are things in full-time ministry that is, STEM related, but I've always just felt like he'll do something really incredible for the world. Make a scientific discovery of some kind of technological discovery. I don't know. Maybe he'll help us get to Mars. I'm not sure what he'll do, but all of it, we've always talked about as a family, like, God is good, and he's about bringing good into the world, and he's given you good gifts to build his kingdom, make this world a better place, bring God's kingdom here on earth. And that could just look, and it could look so many different ways. It's pretty exciting when you open your mind to it in that way.
Well, and I love the way you described it, because if all of your kids went into full-time ministry, pretty soon the Christian influence on the world gets smaller and smaller and smaller.
Mm,
Instead of what you're describing, to set your son free to work in the STEM field in a secular company, that's just salt and light and yeast and seed. And
mm,
that's what the kingdom of God is. And I think also just the way you're describing your approach to parenting is so healthy. And Andrew Solomon wrote a book called Far from the Tree, which is about countering the idea of the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And he makes some amazing points in the book. He talks about any child that you have is almost the same as adopting a child, because any one sperm and egg have thousands of years of genetic DNA material to draw from. And your kids actually won't be like you, nor should they be like you. He talks about how he despises the term mini me and how full of ego that is.
mm.
And to really be a student of your children. He said parenting is a lifelong relationship with a stranger. And that's
Wow.
true. That
Yeah.
your job is to visit the planet they live on, but you can't live there.
Mm,
And find out, who did God make them to be, not who do you need them to be, or can they reflect you so that you feel better about yourself, but who are they? And there's a great humility and freedom in that, that I think is part of setting the world back on its feet the way God intended, to release your children out into the world and for them to be able to see their gifts as absolutely as important as going into whatever full-time ministry means.
mhm. Yes. Wow. I like that quote. Yeah, I'll have to check that book out. That sounds really good.
It is.
um, so we're in this Women in the Church series right now, and many women find more freedom to lead outside the church in their careers than they do inside the church. And I'm sure you've seen that a lot and experienced it occasionally as well. And so I'd love for you to speak to some of these women listening right now, and just what would you say to both these women and to, some of the other church leaders that may be male listening, who need to activate the gifts of these women to lead in the church. We have
Yeah.
executive leaders here in Silicon Valley that are not often finding their spaces in the church to lead. And that's kind of the people we're thinking about when we think about this question.
No, and that's a weird feeling, to go to work and be seen as a leader and then go to church and that's not an option. Feels a little bit like we're back in the dark ages. I think the first level, I would say, is just theologically, to be able to understand the handful of passages that are somewhat difficult to understand, but there's so many resources out there for understanding in a really healthy way. What did Paul mean when he said this? What was the culture like? What was he speaking to? There's one book, and I'm blanking on the name of it right now, but traces the arc of slavery and the arc of women, and shows the progression in culture and in scripture of moving towards a holistic understanding. I mean, you have verses in the New Testament that seem to narrow the role of women, but I think there are really good cultural understandings of those passages that hold to a very high value of scripture, very high position of scripture. There's also verses that there are no male and female, and the end of Romans when he refers to Junius, who was a female deacon in the church. So we have to grapple with it theologically. And then just to make it simple, I will tell women, it really boils down to two choices. If you're in a church that doesn't recognize the full gifting of women, you can stay and you can work towards change. It will be slow, it will be incremental, it may never change, and you can still honor God. Or you can choose to worship in a community that has an understanding of scripture that matches how you understand scripture and be able to use your gifts in those ways. And honestly, I think at the end of the day, they can both be honoring to God. I think one is very limited in its capacity for impact for the kingdom, the first one. But I think God knows that there are limits on this earth and all of us have to live within them. But I've been fortunate to be in a handful of churches that really do recognize the full expression of spiritual gifts in women. And I'm really grateful for that.
Yes, absolutely. And it's good just to think through those couple of options and knowing that you can honor God in either one. And at the same time, be curious, to keep being curious about scripture. I think sometimes, especially like, at my age, 45, and I'm a pastor at a church, and there's passages in scripture that like I still wrestle with. I'm still curious about. I'm still trying to learn more about. I don't have every single verse in the Bible completely figured out at this.
You don't? Well, then what are you doing a podcast for,
I know.
Lori?
What are you doing? And I just think the posture of still being curious, let's God be God, and
I love the posture of curious. That's good.
Yeah. So I think especially in this area of verses around women in scripture, it's certainly an issue that's gotten more recent attention once again. It seems to always come up every now and then as a hot button issue. And I just think it's good to stay curious. It's good to know there, like you said, many resources out there. And in this series, we're trying to point people toward those. But I love hearing your perspective too, just gratitude for the churches that have let you lead.
And I think one more thought too is I think we've become so accustomed to the stories in the gospel. It is so easy to forget and completely underestimate what a shock it was that Jesus as a rabbi had women following him. Like that was just unheard of. And from the Old Testament, just unthinkable. And it's really easy to get so used to those stories we forget Jesus was trying to change and shift things in the way that he almost always did frequently, by not saying too much, but by demonstrating. And I think we just need to pay attention to that as well.
I wholeheartedly agree. Yeah. I mean, there's been days where it just, Christians and church has driven me completely bananas. And you read about Jesus and you're like, oh, he's not like that. He's just never, ever like that. He was so welcoming, affirming, activating of women's gifts in very, like you said, radical ways. We don't get it right now because the world we live in 2021, California, it doesn't feel very radical, but for back then it was, and it still is today.
Mm-hmm. No, and just what you're saying, like, how do we, whatever the issue is, how do we keep turning our faces back to Jesus? It's so easy just culturally to get osmosed into values that we really don't believe. And I just find constantly getting pulled back to the Gospels is really centering for me in some way.
Yeah, same. Jesus never disappoints me. I disappoint myself. The church disappoints
I disappoint Jesus. Yes.
Exactly.
All of it. Yes.
Yes.
100%.
Yes, but he's always good to look at on a very bad day or every day, and it just he's always full of grace with women. The Mary and Martha story for me, like there's so many that are good, right? But that one in particular, where it's like you feel pigeonholed as a woman in the church sometimes, like, why don't you, I don't know, bake casseroles, or why aren't you good at like being more tenacious and finishing all the projects that the men start, or why aren't you more like in the kitchen and in the pantry or whatever. But it's like, I'm pretty sure Jesus was saying that we weren't supposed to be busybodies in the kitchen like that. So I find it very freeing because I'm not great in the kitchen.
That's pretty clear what he was doing. And just the whole idea of, why shouldn't we finish all the projects that men start? It's like, well, do you have time? Because we can sit down and talk about that. There's a lot of reasons why.
Yes. So true. Well, when it comes to just this, faith and work and all that we're talking about right now, do you have any examples of individuals personally that you would like to highlight that you feel like are living out their faith at work in significant ways that might inspire some of the listeners?
I love when I did the work with Lencioni for 12 years as a consultant. I loved his answer because people would say, who's the best leader you've ever known? And he would say all the time, it's someone you've never met, you don't know.
Mm,
It's not these people that are in the newspapers or the magazines or online. While they may be very great leaders, there's so many people doing great things in their job that are just so overlooked.
mm.
And I'll tell a couple stories, and you can edit out whatever takes too long. But I just recently went to an outdoor, very small service for a wonderful man, Dr. Kim, who had been on our advisory board, and we were outside, and his family had 2 or 3 pastors' sons of very large churches there to talk. And then at the end of those of us that spoke that knew him that weren't family, they had his gardener speak. And he was from Mexico, and 20 years ago somehow crossed paths with Dr. Kim to do a little work around his house. And at the end of the day, Dr. Kim asked him, I would like to pay you, how much was today? And he told him, and he said, can I get an invoice? And the man didn't know what to do. So he took a loose piece of paper and wrote it down on a piece of paper. And Dr. Kim took it and he said, that's great. If you come back tomorrow, I'll pay you. And when Javier came back the next day, Dr. Kim had a whole box of stationery printed up with invoices with Javier's name at the top, and had the invoice printed up for Dr. Kim, and all the rest of them were blank to be used. And the other one was his little scrap of paper next to it. And Dr. Kim said to Javier, which business leader do you want to be? And he pointed to the piece of paper and he said, this makes me think of a guy that's just going job to job and isn't really thinking about a business. This stock of paper with printed invoices makes me think of a businessman. And of course, Javier sheepishly pointed to the printed invoices. And Dr. Kim took him that day down to get a computer and a cell phone and started him up on becoming a business leader in his industry. So Javier's doing great work, but needs the next step. Dr. Kim is this brilliant man in the Silicon Valley that's done computer work that I don't even understand. And the two cross paths, and one gets better and the other gets to mentor, and Javier speaks at his funeral. Like, to really, to be looking around all day long for people that are overlooked, that are doing their jobs really well, is such an important part of how the role we can play as Christ followers, to notice people. When I was a nurse years ago, I was working in the emergency room, and it had been 3 or 4 shifts in a row, and I was tired at the end of 3 or 4 days. It was 11:30 at night. It was time to go home. And one of the doctors grabbed me before I left, and he said, hey, could you just do a history and physical on this woman that just came in real quick while we do the end of the shift report? And I thought, on the outside, I smiled and nodded and said, sure, I'd be glad to. And inside I thought, of all the 11 nurses here that are going home, you pick me? I've worked 4 shifts in a row. I'm exhausted. I don't want to do this. So I went into that little cubicle and did not have a great attitude, and took the notes and thought, the woman's got the flu. Who comes to the ER for the flu at 11:30 at night? Her husband and 2 small children had gone up to Mammoth to ski. She was supposed to join him the next day because she had to work. And I was just pretty impatient. And then the doctor came in and read my notes. And then he said, hey, let's just do some real quick blood work on her if you just don't mind staying till we get the results. And I thought, you're killing me. I want to go home. And so I did. And to make a very long story short, just a few minutes later, the fax machine spit up. And for those of you that don't know what it is, you can Google it, but it's a machine where paper comes up, and it gave us the lab results. The woman she was 28 years old. She had fulminating leukemia. She never left the hospital. She died 6 weeks later. I met her husband and her kids over the next 6 weeks. I sat down and clocked out and stayed till 3 a.m. till her sister could get there. And the whole drive home, I felt like God said to me, all I had for you was an extra hour on the shift to be present with this woman. That's what I was asking you to do. And all you could think about was yourself. And I think work is a chance to be less driven by our own ego and more ready to serve. And Lencioni will often say this too: I long for the day when we don't have to put the word servant in front of leadership. we just see leadership as a way to serve.
Oh, that's good. Absolutely. I have a friend that's like, we should just change the word and call it servantship. I don't know if you've read anybody talk about it that way, but it's like some people focus more on the servant side, some people focus more on the leader side, but there's the English is very limited and the way we define it is limited.
And really, servant should be the adjective for every spiritual gift. I have servant hospitality. I have servant faith. I have servant intercession. That's what they're for. The gifts are meant to serve. Yeah.
That's good. I like that. And those are really great examples that we can all think about and help us reimagine our own workspaces at the moment. And
I love that phrase, reimagine our own work.
Yeah, because I mean, if COVID has done anything, it's turned things up and we have these opportunities to think differently. Of course, over Zoom, things are challenging, but I just know like God is a God who can work through us in incredible ways if we allow him to, if we can put our own egos aside and our own desires for, looking a certain way. Those are our big challenges, right? God is the God is the Philippians 2 Jesus, right? Not considering equality with God something to be grasped, but took the form of a servant, and everything about Jesus's life showed us that, walking and speaking with women and all that.
Interesting, that passage. There was a professor at Wheaton College named Jerry Hawthorne, who was a New Testament professor and Greek scholar. And he said that actually that Christ hymn part that you just quoted is more accurately translated, not even though he was God, he gave that up. It's more accurately translated because he was God, he took the form of a servant. This is the nature of God to serve. And when you think about Genesis 1 and 2 and 3, God, before we did anything for him, he put a garden together. He was showing us hospitality. He was serving us. And that's part of what was so different of the creation story of the Jewish people from all the other cultures of that day. All the other gods created people to serve them. It was actually what caused Girard to go from being an atheist to a Christian when he studied the creation story. So this passage in Philippians, because he was God, it was in his nature to serve. That just changes everything.
Oh, absolutely. And if we're made in God's image, the more we lean into service, the more we become like God instead of less like him.
No, say that again. Say that one more time.
The more, we're made in God's image. And if God is a servant, the more we lean into service, the more we're like him and less like where we're not supposed to be. We have choices all the time, every moment, every day, to go toward Jesus or to go away from him. And this whole notion that you have one moment in your life where you accept Jesus and then the rest of your life is set and your eternity is set. There's just so much more to the story. It's like this daily taking up your cross moment by moment. And
I think that view of salvation is used by the evil one to make us completely impotent, just to sail through life. And that's not what salvation is.
No, there's so much more, and we're made for work, and there's a beauty in work. And so God gifts us, and discovering what that is and allowing God to unleash those gifts in us as we work is so important. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, like, at work, people of faith often face these ethical choices. So I know there's a lot in the faith and work space where people sort of tried to unpack that. Men may feel pressured to be a part of, like, maybe a good old boys club at work at the expense of women. Women may be asked to do inappropriate things, wear a short skirt so you get a promotion, these kind of things you hear about occasionally. Bribes may be expected, look the other way when a boss mistreats an employee so they don't get demoted, maybe just a regular part of some people's work environment. And as a person of faith in these environments, it can be really challenging moment by moment to know what, decision to make. And so but these things can happen in ministry. They can happen in full-time ministry in churches, as well as in just, any old job. So what would you advise someone who might be navigating these kind of struggles and they feel alone as a person of faith in the workplace?
The first thing I would say, just to cause us to think a little bit more, is I don't think that happens as often as we think it does. I really don't. I think most businesses can't stay in business over the long haul if they're making really poor financial decisions or hiring decisions. And I think sometimes Christians like to feel like they're being persecuted when they're really not. So, I just think I think you want to be really thorough in your thinking before you put something into that category. Yeah. And then I think there's lots of things that's really easy to say no to. I've never had anybody ask me to wear a shorter skirt to get a promotion. Never. And maybe that says something more about me than them. So I don't know. But I think sometimes I don't know. I think sometimes it's just not that much of a part of our work. But I do think then moving on from that thought is what's good, right, and wise. What's good, right, and wise. And to hold that very lightly. And by lightly, I don't mean hold those words lightly, but when you use them, when you do what's good and right and wise, don't wave a banner, don't make it a big production, just very calmly stick to it. Like, I just don't think that would be a wise choice. I don't think that would be good over the long haul. I can see in the short term that would take this pressure off of us, but in the long term, that's just not going to work, is it? And to be able to, I think to be able to be really comfortable with difficult conversations in a very grace-filled way is a really important skill. And it's hard. It's really hard. But to talk about that person behind their back, that's not the right way to do it. To have the courage to sit down and have a very lighthearted, in a way, easy conversation of, I just don't think I could make that decision or agree with that choice, and here are my reasons. And then to just trust that God, if you make good choices, right choices, and wise choices, that's honoring God, whether he clears a path and allows you to succeed, whatever that means, or not. You've done the good, right, and wise thing. And I sure haven't done that all the time. Oh my goodness. I have so many examples when I haven't. And to trust that God forgives me and invites me into doing it differently next time. And I think for me, the bigger question is, how do I go to work with people who don't share my faith and really love them? Really love them. And part of love would be, let's do the good, right, and wise thing here. Let's do that. And then you're just one voice. That's all you can do. At the end of the day, if you're not in the leadership role, you don't get to make the final decision, but you've gone on record. Sometimes you may have to check in with HR just to say, I want to, it's gotten to the point where I need it to be known that I didn't agree with this. And then you go back to work and you do your job and you do it really well and you treat people well and you make decisions that are collaborative with people and you follow through with people and you praise them as well as give them tough feedback. All those things are part of, I think, being a good Christ follower in the workplace.
Yeah, that's so good. And I'm sure it's encouraging a lot of people right now that are listening around the world, especially in places where Christianity is not the predominant religion. And there's always this feeling of, I guess, imposter syndrome in a lot of cases where you're like, I don't belong here. There's a lot of people that face that on a regular work day, and it can be, it can be like these Esther moments. I'm reading Esther right now. So it can be like these Esther moments where God asks you to do something that could really affect a lot of people's lives.
Absolutely. And that happens.
Yeah,
it does. It does.
But the good news is God empowers us, and it does encourage us to know that other people are out there doing that. And so I hope that people hear that when they're listening today, that when you're making the good and right and wise choice, there's others who are doing it and paying a price. And
Yes.
in the long run, you want to be able to hold your head high that you've done what God asked you to do.
I'm guessing most of us that have been in the workplace have also had the situation where it's been the Christ followers who have been making dubious choices where you're kind of scratching your head, and other people who aren't formally Christians who are doing the good, right, and wise thing. And you're like, okay, wow, the kingdom's in them. They may not know fully what that means yet. They may not know Jesus yet, but and again, that's why I think Jesus spent so much time talking about salt and light and yeast and seed, these things that have disproportionate impact that you mostly don't notice. I've never been to a meal where somebody's talked about the salt afterwards. I've never eaten bread with somebody who's talked about the quality of yeast, but those two things have made all the difference. And that's what we're called to be and do.
Yes, so true. And having spent so much of my life as a person who was following Jesus as a minority in most situations. I mean, most of my relationships over my life have been with people who don't follow Jesus. And I have so often felt that they outshined me and others in their good deeds.
Yeah.
And it is just this reminder to me that we are made in God's image and God is good. And when we see goodness, we just, there's a little smile that comes into my soul when I recognize that, that's God's goodness through people, even people who don't, necessarily worship God at all. And it is a beautiful thing to notice and a challenging thing. It's an embarrassing thing to have someone be more like God than you are when you claim to follow him.
But it's convicting. It's
Mhm.
convicting in the right way. I also think another thing that Christ followers could do in the workplace, again, with a very light touch, is just to apologize. I
Mm.
don't know that we're the best people to come back the next day and say, you know what, I'm sorry. I don't think I spoke up at the meeting and I should have. Or I think I said too much and talked over people. I'm sorry I didn't get that report done on time. I apologize. That's not okay. Like, that makes a big difference. It starts to set a culture of vulnerability and authenticity where people can bring their humanness to work.
Oh yeah, that's really good. That's great advice. Very practical advice that we can all try to get, 5% better at this
Yeah.
year.
There
Adding,
you go.
yeah, so it's a good growth leadership edge we can all work toward. Me for sure. So I'd love for you to talk about, because you're leading TBC and just I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you imagine when you think about the Bay Area, the most unchurched area of the United States, we're told, and the work we do here through the church and outside the church, and just being salt and light, like you said. So when you dream about a Bay Area that is transformed in such a way as to have, all these people in all their careers bringing their full selves to work, what does that look like in your imagination?
Yeah. No, it's exciting to think about that if we can connect all the points of light in the kingdom in the Bay Area, those that are in faith and work and working in marketplace but follow Jesus, pastors, nonprofit leaders, church planters, evangelistic efforts, if we can overlap and connect in that, um, I think it's really interesting that in John 17, Jesus saved his last public prayer for unity. He did not talk about unity in the rest of the Gospels. Why in the world did he do that? And he repeats that word over and over and over again. I think there's this power in this space between us, maybe 5 to 10% overlap, where something exponential is possible, but we always focus on our reasons to stay separate, even as Christ followers. And then at the end of chapter 17, the first verse of chapter 18, the evil one has Jesus on his way to the cross. Now, that's not a coincidence. I think the evil one trembled when he heard Jesus ask the Father to grant unity to his followers. There's a power there that I don't think we fully explored. And so I think bringing like-minded people, whether they're like-minded around homelessness or foster care or leading a church or marketplace ministry, together where we learn together and we pray together and we collaborate and do work together, makes for a powerful expression of the kingdom. Right now, in the Bay Area, a lot of what you would see is individual points of light, but our TBC's job is to bring those points of light together so they shine brighter. One of the things we talk about is, as churches collaborate together to help serve cities, how do we change the conversation among city officials, especially in a secular environment like the Bay Area? When might churches be the first go-to phone call or email that gets sent out in the middle of a crisis by city officials? How might city officials start talking to each other in whispered tones? Hey, if you haven't checked out churches in your zip codes, you're missing one of the most powerful, unstoppable forces in the area. In faith and work, when we have our Christ followers at work, doing all the things we talked about, treating people really well, showing up when they have a personal issue as well as a work issue, being different in a very winsome way. What's possible for the kingdom, and how might people experience Jesus again for the first time or the second time in a way that they haven't before in a very secular area? That gets me very excited.
Oh, that's exciting too. I had during this time of pandemic, we at our church with Darren Alarde, who I know we started this thing called Echo Compassion. It was a dream he had, and He's incredible at starting things, and it was really exciting to be a part of at a time when we were stopping church services in person. We
Right.
felt like the church was really growing because people started serving our community. And so I got put in this role of the development director, which is where I was reaching out to all these different nonprofits and civic organizations and, Mayor Licardo's office and all these things here in San Jose. And just reaching out and being like, how could we partner together as this new effort, Echo Compassion? And I really got such a different view of what our civic leaders go through, the way we could be, more pastoral with them. I was even able to have a phone call with Mayor Licardo's kind of right hand guy, and just in the call, ask him how he's doing with his family. I mean, he was going through the pandemic too, and then trying to lead us, and just to be like, we're here for you. Like, what do you need most? Do you just need to talk to someone? We can do that. Do you want to use our volunteers to do something amazing? We can do that too. But it just made me realize what an untapped thing that is here in our area. And so I love that part of your vision.
Well, and just what you said, you went and asked them what they needed. Sometimes in churches, and I don't think it's badly intended, but we come with our ideas and it's not what they most need. And anytime you serve somebody in their point of greatest need, it's really a testimony. Like, I know a lot of churches, and I've been part of this, we'll do backpack drives and paint murals, and those are good things. But most principals go to bed at night worried about third grade reading levels, which are incredibly predictive for academic success. And therefore, how do churches come in and help tutor and then teacher retention? So what can be done in those two areas where their biggest felt needs are? Maybe we use things like backpack drives and murals to build trust, but then how do we say, no, what's really keeping you up at night? And how do we activate people in our church who are passionate about those things to help? Yeah.
Yes, that's so true. One of the lessons we took out of our time working in tsunami relief in Indonesia in 2004 was, good community development principles, which we were trained in the Philippines. There's an incredible place, a rural development model that my husband and I went to and learned from Filipinos who are doing things really well, using local herbs and medicines, and doing, goat milk farms and these crazy things. But the whole principle behind it is you don't go in and say, here's what I have to offer. You go in and you talk to village leaders and get communities together, and you say, what are your biggest needs? And then we don't want to solve it for you because we couldn't, even though we want to be the white savior. But in the end, this is best if we do this together based on what you have tagged as a need in your community. And we saw this over and over again in the tsunami relief, because we had big NGOs, and I won't name any names, but there's ones that you would have heard of around the world that came in, and they gave these things and they weren't needed. I mean, even like strange things happen, like Achinese people were walking around with backpacks full of US $100 bills, which there was no exchange place to even exchange it. I was like, oh, thank you. Or obviously the really bad one, which was pork and beans for Muslims. They don't eat pork, just like so blind. Like there's just such value in listening and knowing what people need. And we know that on a community level, but we know it on an individual level, like in a family, as a parent, in a marriage, like as a wife, if I just assume what my husband needs and he's like, I don't need that. Thanks for that present for Christmas, but I don't need that, or whatever.
I'd like to take it back.
Yeah, exactly. Is there a gift receipt, please? But yeah, we do that on macro levels too, I think, in the church. And so I love your vision of that, where it's really deep listening, really good connections with the leaders in our communities, that we can be seen as not just saviors for everything the way we want to do it, but
it takes us right back to what you said earlier, is what would a servant do? What would a servant do? A servant wouldn't come in with their idea of what's best. A servant would come in and say, what's going on and what do you need and how can I help?
Yeah.
And that builds trust to then gain access to even the deeper needs that are there that they maybe won't start off by telling us.
Yeah, that is so true. Well, one more thing I'd like to unpack is, some people are at work and they don't know how to even talk about their faith in certain environments. I hear this a lot as a pastor here in Silicon Valley. I heard it a lot in Singapore and Indonesia as well. Sometimes just wanting to do the right thing, wanting to say it in the right way, and not really knowing how, because sometimes the tools and the methods we're given are not a posture of service. Like we've mentioned, they're not a posture of deep listening. They're more of like, you have this set agenda of how you have to say something, which often with real people and who are
No.
human beings. It doesn't quite work. So
No.
what advice would you have for anyone who's just kind of wondering how they can make a difference in that conversation?
And what you were just describing, people feel like a project.
Yeah.
And then they start avoiding, and then the Christians feel like they're being persecuted when actually they've kind of brought it on themselves.
Yeah.
A couple of thoughts. I think one of the things our chairman will say of our organization is that doing your work really, really well is the first step.
Mm.
Doing it really well, being a great worker, because then you earn the right to be able to say something else. So I think that would be first. And then there's a woman named Sue Warnke in the Bay Area. She works for Facebook, and she's pretty extraordinary. And she'll do two things that I just love. You know, it's not a Bible on her desk. It's not leading a Bible study at lunch or getting the 4 spiritual laws out with people. It's very organic and it's very genuine. And the first thing is on Monday, you know, when they were in the office, but even on meetings, when they'll talk about what did you do over the weekend, she will often, not always, but throw in the middle of hiking and doing stuff with her kids and running errands and seeing a movie, going to church, getting the car fixed, and just throwing church in there as a very light touch, so that it becomes a seed. And somebody might remember that. Somebody might be offended by it. Somebody might be appalled by it, but she'll just throw that out there. And then the other thing she does, because she's not only a great leader, because she's a great leader, she also cares about her people's personal life. And whether they're talking to her about a work situation where they're stuck and they're feeling anxiety around that, or they bring to her something from their personal life that's hard, she will listen. And then she will say, is it okay if I pray for you? And she doesn't pray for them right there because that could be awkward. And I think if I remember her right, I don't think she's ever had anybody say no. And then she will pray for them. And then whenever it feels appropriate and not too pushy, she will just check back in and say, just wanted to know, I prayed about that situation with your mom. How's it going? And, you know, we have to earn the right to be invited into a conversation. And then I think the bigger issue too is the humility to say, I may not be in their life when they meet Jesus. I may have, like Sue does, she plants these beautiful seeds because Jesus told her that's her job, is to plant seeds. His job is to harvest and or to cause the growth. And it may be years from now or months from now or at their aunt's house where all these seeds come together and they see Jesus. So to be okay with having been a seed. There were a lot of times in the Gospels, I just finished rereading them this year in the Message translation. There were a lot of times when Jesus did a miracle and the first thing he said to his disciples, we're leaving and don't tell anybody what we just did.
Yeah.
I don't really know, but he did not connect the gospel message every time he did a miracle. So I think there are times to be more direct and other times to have a soft touch that allows a magnetic force to develop where they may, if they're ready, they may come back.
Yeah, I love all that. It's Sue's going to be on the podcast too. I'm interviewing her in a couple of days, and I also love her. I love the things she writes about how to bring your faith to work, and I love that she's come from a journey of her own where she didn't.
Her story's remarkable.
Yeah, I always find people like that fascinating because, like, what was it that made you change? You know, I have a lot of Muslim friends who decided to follow Jesus, and that's a huge leap. Like, that's an incredible leap. They've given up so much more than I ever will. And I'm always curious, like, what it is. And I find that those stories so beautiful, and they help me understand how to have conversations that are more authentic with people about faith of all religious backgrounds or no religion at all. I think there is a common humanity that that we all share if we're willing to go there. And as soon as we start seeing ourselves as Christians, as followers of Jesus, as above people or better than people, you know, my husband has this phrase. He's like, we're all in the same boat. We all need a savior. We can't do this life on our own. And even if we think we can, we can't. You know, there are times in life where we just need something besides what we have to offer.
That posture lets me enter in a conversation with a coworker who's not a believer, and I don't have to act like I'm perfect. I can say, when they mess up I can say, oh yeah, me too. I've done that before too, and I hated that. Don't you? I don't have to put myself above them. Yeah. Which is never a good way to get somebody to want to share more.
No, it's the first way to shut someone down.
Yeah.
And so I love that illustration. I always kind of keep it in my brain. We're all in the same boat.
Yep.
Well, Nancy, thank you so much. Is there anything else you would like to say to our listeners around the world, either about women in the church or faith and work or anything that I didn't ask?
I just think, to go back to what we talked about earlier, is like, even if it's for 5 minutes a week, if it's 2 minutes a day, if it's an hour a month, how do we turn our faces back towards Jesus from time to time, to just sit with him? I've been reading a lot of Henry Nouwen lately, and even that amazing man had the hardest time believing he was beloved by God. And if I'm honest, I do too. I do too. And sometimes these ideas of it has to be an hour every day, every morning, I don't know that that's helpful. And I think sometimes to say, in the course of a day, I'm going to take 2 minutes and be alone and quiet and just say to myself, Jesus, it's hard for me to believe that you love me like you say you do. Help me. I want to believe it's true, but it's too good to be true. Those little minutes. I'm also reading a lot of a young woman named Etty Hillesum, who was a 28, 29-year-old Dutch Jewish woman going into Auschwitz. And the 2 years before, she would talk about building a place inside of her that was just her and God. And there was great joy there. It's like, how can you talk about joy when you are looking Auschwitz in the face? And she would talk about sometimes just 2 deep breaths in a day and 5 minutes talking to God would put her back into center where she needed to be. And it's like, oh, that bar's low. And I honestly, I think Jesus made the bar low, not high.
Yep.
Mustard seed. I've got a little bowl of mustard seeds in my kitchen, and I will just pick one of them up sometimes and roll them between my fingers for 30 seconds. That's all Jesus is asking of me. Just a mustard seed. I can do that.
Oh, that's good. That's really good. One of my spiritual directors back when I was in Indonesia is an incredible woman, Suzanne Williams. And she, we read through this book. I had been on a spiritual retreat that she and her husband both led. And I think it's Robert Mulholland Jr.
Oh, yes.
Invitation to a Journey. Is that the name of it?
Yeah. Fabulous book.
So good. It was the first time. I mean, I didn't have kids yet, just a kind of young married woman. And it was so fascinating to discover, parts of myself that I felt like were patterns of how God spoke to me. And it was really during that time that it solidified. And I stopped feeling guilty about the fact that being in nature is a really big thing for me.
Yeah.
Yes. And even some of the tactile things, like I was living in a Muslim culture at the time. We had Islamic law, and I dressed, Muslim wear, and we didn't really know any other Christians, or hardly any. And so I never saw a cross. I didn't see churches. When it was Christmas time, you never would have known. And there was a group of people from Egypt, some Coptic Christians, that came out and just wanted to pray in our area. So we kind of facilitated that. And they brought me this little cross from Egypt, and I just kind of kept it in a drawer. To have a cross out in that situation, some people found it very offensive. So I didn't want to offend anyone, just because some people think of the Crusades and Christians did really bad things, and I didn't want to offend anyone. So I kept it in a drawer, like in my desk. But I would light a candle, as my spiritual director helped me discover things that kind of helped me. I would light a candle. Sometimes I would just hold that cross, and I would try to at least look outside the window, take a walk if I could. And then when I became a young mom and had a baby that didn't sleep through the night for the first 2 years, and then I had twins, and that was a whole other thing.
Well, here's what I love. You have 3 little kids, and you get the phrase quiet time. You're like, quiet?
No, that never happened. No, absolutely not. No. And so, but it was just like these, like you said, just short moments, just like a reminder of centering. Even she gave me this little book called Breath Prayers. We know what these are, but breath prayers kind of got me through, because it's like, all I have right now is to just breathe and say this phrase. There you go. But, just discovering it. It is enough. And so that book kind of freed me up to be like, it can look different ways in different seasons at different times. And that's okay.
It's good. It's not just okay. It's good.
It's good. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you, Nancy. What are some resources that you would recommend? Books, movies, songs, podcasts, thought leaders?
Oh my goodness. Oh, there's so many. I mean, the book, we were just talking about Mulholland's book. Another one like that is called Sacred Pathways by Gary Thomas. Yeah. Where he talks about 11 ways of connecting to God and choosing the top 2 or 3 for yourself. I listen to such a wide variety of podcasts. It's just almost embarrassing. There's some leadership ones I love, and there's some ones on an opera that I just have found fascinating. And then, stories of California. I think, finding what feeds your soul and letting that be your pathway to God is so important.
Mm,
Um, Instead of just taking recommendations from somebody else, being a student of yourself. St. Augustine used to say the first step in understanding God is understanding yourself.
mm,
God made you. So learning what works for you and what books and podcasts and nature feed your soul, or whatever it is, worship music for some people. I've got friends for whom worship music is their primary way to meet God. And I have others who say, if I never listened to another worship song my whole life, I would be still connected to God.
yeah.
And the two groups are appalled at each other. At the end of the day, it's all good. It's fine. It's
Mhm.
fine. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good advice. Well, thank you for your time today, Nancy. You are just such a blessing. You help us think
You're
outside the
welcome.
box.
Thanks for doing it.
Oh, of course. Yeah, it's my pleasure, my honor. And yeah, I hope that you have a year full of surprises, new imagination, blessing, and just that God continues to show you how you're made and for this next season for you and John and your whole family. We love you guys.
Thank you. That's lovely. Thank you. And tell Sue I said hello when you talk to her.
I definitely will. Bye, Nancy.
Bye. Thanks, Lori.
Isn't Nancy just so great? I just feel like when I listen to her and talk to her, I just feel like it's so good for the soul. She really does expand my imagination of what it can look like to follow Jesus, to experience more of the beauty of Jesus, and to, instead of, I guess, falling into the trap we often fall into, which is we have to look a certain way and be a certain kind of cookie cutter Christian, or a certain cookie cutter woman, or a certain cookie cutter even leader, as she follows Jesus and explores who she is, and throughout her life has done the hard work of that. Just you can see the beauty of that reflected in her life and in her journey, and it means she doesn't get blown in different directions when the wind comes her way and storms come into her life, that she stays steady on those things. And it's a good reminder to me today of whatever we're going through, and COVID still raging around our planet here in California, especially, and just the political winds that blow one direction or another. That there's a steadiness that she calls us to, and in life, and just I just appreciate her voice, especially as she thinks through what it could look like here in the Bay Area, for the Bay Area to be transformed in the ways that she described. And as you're thinking through your own workplaces, wherever you are around the world today, listening to this, I really hope that encouragement to just have just the faith of a small little mustard seed. Maybe you'll do what she did and just have a jar of mustard seeds in your kitchen, and once in a while hold it in your hand. We're spending a lot of time at home these days, so that might be a little more possible than it would be regularly in the midst of Zoom calls for work. But yeah, just those reminders of, it's the little things. It's the being faithful in the small things, doing our best job we can at work, and allowing God's goodness to flow through us, whether we believe in God or not. But just that pursuit of goodness that's all around us, that we could invite into our own selves and into our own jobs, our own journeys, and our families and communities. And, I also loved really the things that she was mentioning about partnering together with people in our civic organizations around us, the people that lead us, the mayors of our cities. They're going through such difficulty with, just relentless decision making going on. For public healthcare workers like Dr. Sarah Cody here in Santa Clara, I can only imagine how exhausted she is after a year of this. And I just reaching out as people who just want to serve and help and be a part of the solution. And I think we all need a little help right now. So especially our leaders in our community. So that was a good reminder today for all of you out there who are different and who are wanting to make a difference. I really feel like this is a good space to step into, whatever that looks like for you, wherever you are, whether you're in Indonesia and you're thinking about the mayors of your city and wondering how you can be more supportive, a better help to help goodness come through in your community. Or maybe you're living in Singapore and you're in a busy office work environment, and you're noticing your boss or your manager or your CEO is just tired and just wanting to find a way to be helpful. I just think that that example of servant leadership is something we want to see more of and we want to be more of. And certainly Nancy has called us to that today. Not trying to be perfect, because that's a game none of us will win, but knowing that even when we make mistakes and we fail, we can apologize if that's necessary, like she said, but also, give ourselves grace to just learn from that and try to, do our best next time. I would say I've said this multiple times in COVID to my family, about myself, about others, and even in my workspace, that none of us are our best selves right now. It's hard. So we need a lot of grace, and we need to pull together. And like she said, that dream of what she sees of transforming the Bay with Christ, churches working together, workspaces working together, just human beings locking arms and joining forces. We're so much brighter when we don't shine alone, but when we shine together. And so that was something I took away from my conversation with Nancy today. And I hope that you have some good takeaways too. Share them with your friends and family as an accountability of something you want to follow through with, but also just as a way to inspire them. So next week, we have Sue Warnke on the podcast, which is funny that Nancy was mentioning her, and that's who's going to be on here next week. Yes, there is just no way we would have a full, complete conversation about faith and work within this Women in the Church series without inviting Sue Warnke onto the show. She works at Salesforce here in San Francisco. She leads Faith Force, which is something she was a part of helping to get ramped up when she, a few years ago, made the decision to follow Jesus and recognize that it's not easy to bring your full authentic self to work, especially in conversations around faith in a lot of our workspaces around the world. And so she wanted to be a part of helping be a change agent in that area. And it's been a beautiful thing, not just for followers of Jesus, but for people of all faith backgrounds to be able to be fully themselves. And, I love this whole movement, because one of the things I loved about my years in Singapore is there's this really high value for harmony. And Singapore is the most religiously diverse nation in the world. And one of the things that I noticed was sometimes with all the diversity of religions, people they didn't want to talk about it in a deep way because they were afraid of offending people. And I myself, sometimes I was afraid of that. But what I found was when I could fully be myself as a follower of Jesus in a way that was not pushy, but respectful, and also, worked hard at deeply listening to others and their perspectives on faith and what they believed, that it allowed for a deeper level in my relationships with people that I knew. Even sometimes total strangers, like sitting in a what they call hawker center in Singapore and just talking to people, or meeting someone, I don't know, at the library with your kids at a story time, or just on public transportation or anything. Like, it's that scary thing sometimes people don't want to do, is talk about what they believe because they're afraid of being offensive. And Sue Warnke is going to come talk to us about how to do that well, some handles that she has found helpful, and some tools that are productive in helping that conversation be comfortable and easy and deep, and respectful of both parties all at the same time. So you are not going to want to miss Sue Warnke next week. And I really look forward to our conversation together around this concept of faith and work and how we can do better having those kind of conversations at work. So I hope you guys have an awesome week. I know it's not easy out there. People are dealing with a lot of things, me, myself as well. My family here in California with COVID still raging, and a lot of, just things that we're dealing with related to what that means a year in. It's been a year almost, guys and ladies, and it's not easy. So hang in there, everyone. I know that you're all trying to be the best kind of different wherever you are, and also making a difference where you are. And so I'm here to cheer you on and provide you speakers that can cheer you on in these interviews. And I hope you're finding it helpful. We will talk to you next week. Bye, everyone. As we're finishing this episode, if you're thinking, I really wish I could learn more or go a little bit deeper. Well, that's what our Difference Maker community is for. I would love to welcome you in to join the rest of us there. Once again, it's only $5 a month to join, the price of a latte at your local coffee shop. You can join at our Changers tier. Difference Makers is a community that really means so much to me. It's very special because each time I have a guest on the show, I record something outside of what we give to just the regular podcast audience, where we go a little bit deeper. And then I post those video episodes in this community and we can discuss them. But also at the very beginning tier, which is our Changers tier of this community, you'll get exclusive voting power and help pick podcast topics that give us, more of what we want from your perspective. You'll have access to exclusive 30 plus mini-sodes that aren't out there for the general public. And you'll get every month an exclusive monthly bonus mini-sode. At our Groundbreakers level, which is $10 a month, you can join and get all of that, but also priority access to submit questions to the podcast. And you'll get an additional 2 exclusive monthly bonus mini-sodes. And at our Trailblazers tier, which is $15 a month, the price of 3 lattes a month, you can get all of that, plus also 3 exclusive monthly bonus minisodes, and a patron shout out. So I would love for you to join us at any of those tiers. It'll help you come into this community, be in the midst of all of us, other difference makers, and we'd love to hear your perspective. I certainly would. It's a place to engage more with me and the audience around what you like, what you're resonating with, and once again, go deeper with each of our guests. So please join us in this membership community. I would love to hear your perspective and love to share this extra content with you. So show up at patreon.com/a world of difference.